Hey, welcome to another great edition of Mississippi Stories. I'm your host, Marshall Ramsey, editor-at-large at Mississippi Today and cartoonist as well. But we love doing the show, Mississippi Stories, and I think you're going to love today's episode. And if you'd like to see any past episodes, you can always go to MississippiToday.org and find all of them there and some of my cartoons and some great reporting as well. Our guest today is somebody that I got to know in a very intimate way at 5 o'clock in the morning on a football field as he's making me push a board or do yoga or do all kinds of horrible, difficult things as I was sweat. But he's probably the most motivational person I've ever met, and somebody I'm very, very proud to call a friend. I don't get to see him as often as I used to, but I'm very proud of his life. And the reason I want him to come on today is that Neil Woodall Jr. has had one of the most inspirational stories when it comes to overcoming addiction. And as we saw this, I think it's in the last couple of weeks, they were showing that the number of people being addicted to opioids has risen by like 30% during the pandemic. And that is a very frightening number indeed. I don't know if you've seen the show Dope Sick that was on Hulu as well, kind of showing you the scourge and the scar that opioids have caused in this country. And so anyway, I wanted to have Neil on today to tell a little bit about his story, not only about that part of his story, but also some of the inspiration that he now gives people every day. And if you get a chance, check out his Facebook page, because it gives me a big lift every day, especially during these scary times that we live in. Neil, thank you for joining me today. It's good to see you, my friend.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you having me on. I don't know if I can fill the shoes of saying the most motivational person, but I got to say, you yourself are very motivational and you're an inspiration. I always appreciate the fact when we get a chance to connect like this and have these conversations. So I know it's kind of few and far between, but I appreciate you having me on.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, that's now I have pressure. I'm going to have to do a good job interviewing you. I have to give you a motivational interview here. I kind of joked when I was doing show prep with this last night. I was talking to my wife, Amy. I said, yeah, I'm going to have Neil on. Of course, my two sons have also been coached by you to some degree or the other, and they both really think the world of you. And Amy's just like, well, just say, hi, this is Neil, and then just let him talk for the next 45 minutes, and it'll be a great interview. But I won't put that kind of pressure on you. But where would you like to start with this? Because I think, obviously there was a before the addiction happened, and that's what led you to the addiction. But where would you like to start?
Yeah, look, and that's a loaded question, because the reason why I say it's a loaded question is because if I'm thinking about the path that is addiction, where it doesn't really officially start. And,
right.
It's always, when I share my story, I always kind of have this climactic moment where I share like what happened. And obviously I went through a traumatic experience, but realistically, that was just kind of the moment that was the catalyst that led to the addiction. There were so many other things that led up to it beforehand. And so I guess to start and kind of, level set and kind of talk about my background and where I come from and what my upbringing looked like, I think maybe a good starting place, because a lot of folks, when you think of addiction, I think everybody at this point in life has had somebody, whether it's they themselves or a family member or close friend or whoever it may be, that has been touched by addiction. And I think that for so long there was such a stigma attached to addiction, and there were so many folks out there that thought addiction was just this certain socioeconomic status, this certain types of people. But now we're starting to see that it affects everybody across the board, regardless of background, socioeconomic status, financial background, family. It affects everybody. So I think that giving some context about kind of my background and what my upbringing looked like, and then we can kind of get more into the nitty gritty details of the addiction itself.
Yeah, I've always heard that if you could take childhood trauma, for instance, out of the DSM, which is the manual that all, psychiatrists use to describe all kinds of maladies down the line, that it would be about this thick, because generally it's like I said, addiction starts somewhere. It's self-medication. It is literally people trying to calm things. And I can tell you from personal experience, I know that, for instance, when I had melanoma, I had surgery and they would give me the pain pills. And after about 2 or 3 days, I was taking the pain pills, and it was more about forgetting I had cancer than it was, for instance, about the pain pills. It's like, ooh, this is scary. I need to quit that. But so there is a degree, I would imagine, of just trying to quiet something, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as I look back on my history, growing up, and I think that I don't know if you want to say I was set up or a dry. I always make a joke that I was a freeze dried addict, coming out, and because I had a lot of when I was growing up as a kid, I had a normal upbringing. I had two parents that are still together to this day. I had two older
Yeah.
sisters, and we lived in. I mean, if you looked at our life from the outside looking in, you would say it looks like a normal lifestyle,
Right.
normal family, happy family. But again, going back to what you just shared, it was the um, internal chatter that started at a young age for me. And there was
Yeah.
always a lot of insecurities within myself, a lot of things that I didn't even realize. Even at a young age, I was very insecure with myself, didn't have that confidence. I'd see kids that seem to be very outgoing and just could stand up for themselves. I always kind of struggled with that. And so
Yeah.
I actually kind of found solace in sports. Sports was a big thing for me growing up, and I always gravitated towards sports. And sports is a large part of who I am today, still to this day, because it ingrained a lot of different characteristics within me. And so, yeah, growing up, again, going back to kind of my mindset as a child, confidence was a struggle, self-esteem was a struggle. And it's funny because my dad, he was my mentor, obviously my father, he was my coach growing up, and he was always the type of guy that was real tough guy, and kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Always instilled in me the importance of discipline, taking care of yourself. He himself is the oldest of three boys, and he at a young age, when my dad I think was 8 years old, his father, his biological father, left him and his two brothers and my biological grandmother to fend for themselves. And the reason why is because he himself struggled with addiction and alcoholism,
Yeah.
and life was just too much for him. So he decided that he was going to up and leave. And so my dad had to step into this role of a father figure for his two younger brothers, which at that age, I mean, you're 8 years old. You're never going to be a father figure to your two younger brothers, but he
Right.
felt like he had to take on that responsibility. And so his first interaction with addiction was, abandonment. Father up and leaves. Life gets to be too difficult. You just leave your family and leave all your responsibilities. And then his youngest brother, my dad's youngest brother, my uncle, struggled with addiction. He struggled, I mean, from a very young age. And you could say maybe it had to do with the fact he didn't have a father figure in his life, whatever it may be. But I mean, there is also a genetic component to
Yeah.
addiction as well. And if that epigenome, that environment doesn't turn on that gene, you may never experience it. But most cases, something's going to happen that's going to activate that gene, and that's exactly what happened with my uncle. And so my dad had to, kind of try to, scare his brother straight. And I don't think that ever really worked for him.
Yeah.
And so my dad, growing up, my dad always told me, based on my biological grandfather leaving him and his two younger brothers to fend for themselves, that addiction was a weakness. That, anybody that struggled with addiction or alcoholism, they were just weak, mentally weak. And then I saw my uncle, and I'd see, whenever he came over for Christmas or Thanksgiving get-togethers, I saw the effects that drugs and alcohol had on him. I mean, he'd be at the dinner table slurring his words and passing out at the dinner table. And there's one memory that I have at a young age. I was about 6 years old, and I can remember my dad grabbed my uncle by the collar and he pulled him out into the garage. My dad left the door cracked just a little bit, and I followed him because I wanted to see what was going on. And I peeked in there and I saw my dad slam my uncle against the wall. And he said, not so many words, if you show up to my house like this again, I'll kill you. It's basically what he said. So that for me was powerful to experience that and to see that. And so witnessing that, hearing my dad's opinions on addiction, and just being, in that type of environment. I wasn't in an environment where alcohol and drugs was actively in our household, but to see that how it had affected my father, see how it affected our family. I always told myself at a young age, like, I will never go down that path. That will never be me. I would never do that. And it's funny, today I have the opportunity to go back to my high school and share my story. And I always tell the young men there, it's a Catholic, all boys Catholic school. And I always tell the young men there, I always tell them, because I usually have the opportunity to share in the chapel. It's a small chapel, intimate get together where I share with individual classes. And I always tell them, when I was sitting in that pew that you're sitting right now, if you would have asked me that question, if you'd ever struggled with addiction, I would have said, heck no, that would never be me. And if people ask me the reason why, I'd say, because look, I was raised right, had a good upbringing, had parents that were actively involved in my life. I played sports. I did well in school. I had a lot of different things that if you looked at my life, you would say, this guy's setting himself up for success. And if somebody would ask, is he setting himself up for addiction? Absolutely not. But again, going back to the historical context of how addiction starts, I struggled with my own internal demons, self-esteem, confidence. When we talk about trauma is a big part of addiction within itself. And when people think trauma, they usually think, sexual assault or something else, physical abuse. So they think things like that. But there's other experiences that can be traumatic for a child growing up. And one that, I think I probably not undermined or just haven't really paid much attention to is when I was 6 years old, I actually fell out of a treehouse and ruptured my spleen. And it was
wow.
So I had a pretty serious surgery at a young age.
Yeah.
And that was something that probably affected me more than I realized. It's like one of those things where was in a lot of physical pain, but afterwards, you don't feel safe. You don't feel that safety and that safety net. And so I'm sure that contributed too. But yeah, I mean, kind of bringing it back and just thinking about all the different people that I've come across in my addiction journey and recovery journey, really, and listening to their stories. That was something that always attracted me to people. People would share their stories and I'd listen to where they came from. When people when I first went to a treatment center, and I'll get into kind of my pathology through addiction, but when I went to a recovery center, I was always so interested in the people that showed up and shared their stories, because they'd share about where they came from, their background, all the things that led to what they did. And when I first sat in the rooms and I'd listen to these guys, these men and women share their stories, I was always trying to find how I was different from those people. I was always saying, like, I don't want to, because I didn't want to be an addict. Like when I was fully, finally got to that stage where I was in full blown addiction, I didn't want to be an addict. I didn't want to accept the fact that I struggled with addiction. But when I listened to these men and women share their stories, I couldn't help but recognize the same patterns, the same types of things that were underneath the surface that affected us all. Now, there may have been different details about how we got to where we were, and maybe different details about the things that we had done during addiction. But what led to it, the crux of addiction itself, was all one and the same. We were all pretty much the same underneath all the layers that you get through.
How was that? How were you same? And what were some of those patterns?
Yeah. A lot of people talk about, the struggle with self-esteem. People talk about the struggles with self-confidence. Just talk about feeling really, it's almost like you feel different. It's almost like you feel like you're an alien amongst human beings. And you're looking at other people and you're saying, how are these people dealing with life on life's terms and doing it so well? And here I am feeling like I'm struggling to do certain things. And there's as with addiction, there's a lot of other mental health components that come with it, whether it's depression, anxiety, social anxiety. There's a lot of different things that come with it. And so, we're dealing, you could be dealing with a mental health issue and then also have something traumatic that happened to you as well. And then couple that with, you got the genetic predisposition to addiction, you add those elements up, and then you got the environment that activates that gene. Boom. I mean, it's a pretty simple, once you look at the equation and do the math, it's going to happen. And so when you start to hear these people's stories, there was a lot of the same kind of patterns where they either had a direct family member, whether it was a father or mother or grandfather, that struggled with addiction. So there's that genetic component. And then they also talked about some type of trauma that they themselves had, whether it was, physical trauma or getting in an accident, like in my case, or, something else that happened to them. And then also the mental health component as well. They all struggled with that kind of underlying anxiety or depression or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I've got addiction in my family, and I had back surgery last year. And of course that was incredibly painful. And I was on opioids, painkillers for a long time. And there was one night when my wife she didn't wake up, or because I couldn't get out of the chair at that point. And she usually brought my pain medicine to me. And it was like I was having a negotiation with the devil till about 7 o'clock in the morning, when she got up, and she was apologetic and everything. And she handed me my pain pill, and it was like a warm hug. Mm-hmm. And that was like, okay, time to wean. Yeah. Because, and the reason I say that is as I recently read the book, Children of Alcoholics, and that's not the exact title of it, but the point is, there so many kids were just like that, saying, my dad was an alcoholic. I'm not going to become an alcoholic. I'm doing everything. And then they end up becoming alcoholics. And so that's what that sounded very much like on that. So you really had a lot of good things going on when you had the accident. And of course, I want you to tell about the accident too. And so your life was actually hitting on all cylinders, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it really was. So, I mean, when I so through high school, I mean, I got out, came through high school, I think I had a 3.8 GPA, had some scholarship opportunities
Yeah.
for baseball, football. And so I went to Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi, there in Jackson, and did well in school, and really kind of found my way in college. And as I was finishing up college, I ended up I was a 4-year all conference fullback at Millsaps.
Wow.
And ended up getting my undergrad in 2008, and then I was going to roll right into getting my master's as well. And so at the time, I mean, things were, I mean, really lining up for me, and I feel like I'd had some success. And again, looking from the outside, looking in, things were lining up. And then I'd landed a job in doing chemical sales. Started doing chemical sales. Oh, excuse me, let me backtrack, because I want to get to the accident, because that is a key component to all of this. So my freshman year of college, when I first came in for my first semester of college, I just finished up my first season of college football. And every year for 10 years prior, we'd always go on an annual hunting trip with one of my dad's big business customers. And we go to a place I'm sure everybody's familiar with, Loosedale, Mississippi. And we go do duck and quail hunting. And I wasn't as big of a fan of duck hunting, because duck hunting, you sit in the blind and you kind of just sit there and wait for the ducks to fly overhead and you shoot. I was more, and maybe part of it's my ADHD, but I liked being out in the field doing quail hunting. And for those that, I'm sure there's plenty of hunters that listen to the show, but you know, quail hunting, when you get out there, safety is the biggest thing that they emphasize when you're out there, making sure everybody knows where the other people are. And usually we go out there with a party of about 5 people, but on this particular day, there was 3 of us. It was me, myself, my dad, and then there was another guy, and then the guide and the dog were out there. So it wasn't a big party, which in the past we always had at least 5 or 6 guys. So, you know, we were all going to get our shot for the day. So we were out there. We've been hunting for, I guess, a couple of hours at this point. The one gentleman that was with us had already reached his limit, shot his limit of quail for the day, and then I had shot my limit, and my dad was 1 bird away from hitting his limit. And so usually when you set up, when you're quail hunting, you all line up next to each other. Everybody's usually wearing some kind of bright orange so everybody can see where each person is. And then the guide makes sure that each person knows, okay, bird flies to the left, the guy that's on the outside to the left, he takes that shot. The bird flies to the right, the guy that's on the outside to the right takes that shot. The bird flies down the middle. The gentleman in the middle will take that shot. So everybody kind of knew exactly what we needed to do. And that's how we've been following suit all day up to that point. But there was, my dad again had 1 more bird that he needed to hit to reach his limit. So I said, hey, look, there's 1 bird that had flown a little bit rogue out of the cubby earlier. And I remember exactly where it landed. It landed up there by that tree. I said, I guarantee if you go up there, that bird's going to be sitting in that same kind of general vicinity where it landed earlier. So I said, you go ahead with the guide and the dog, and I'm going to hang back. So I hung, again, going back to the safety component. I was directly behind my dad. He moved up about 20, 25 yards ahead of me with the guide and the dog. And sure enough, the dog gets on point. I hear the guide say to my dad, you ready? Dad says, yep. And then the guy starts kicking around. Sure enough, that bird comes up, starts flying. And so my dad immediately draws the gun. The bird starts flying directly straight ahead, gets about 5 yards away. He's waiting for it to fly, get a little bit of distance between him and the bird, because if he shoots it right away, he's gonna blow it to smithereens. So bird starts circling around. He starts circling around with the gun. And directly behind him is me, about 20, 25 yards directly behind him. Right at the last minute, he pulls the trigger. And as he's swinging around, he doesn't see me out of his peripheral vision. And the momentum from him swinging around, the shotgun blast hits me directly in the chest and face.
Oh, good gosh.
And so I immediately, first thought that I have in this moment is that I got struck by lightning, because I get this metallic taste in my mouth. I see a flash of bright light. I kind of come to, and then at this point, the other gentleman that was with us, he was about 40 yards off to my left. He started screaming for me to sit down. And I started to kind of realize, okay, what happened here? Okay, I realized that I've been shot. So the other Gentleman comes over to me. He starts running over to me. At this point, the guy grabs the dog, and him and the dog are running back. And mind you, we're out in the middle of a field in Lucedale,
Yeah.
Mississippi. So we're about at least 45 minutes from foot from any kind of vehicles or really anything from civilization. So guy comes over, and it's cold. It's a cold January morning. Guy, first thing that he does is takes the shirt off and sticks it down into my shirt. And I'm starting to kind of do the math here and try to figure out how serious is this situation. And at this time, my adrenaline's through the roof. And so I've got kind of like Spider-Man senses. I can't feel anything. I'm trying to figure out how serious this is. But the thing that I remember the most through it all was as I'm sitting there and this gentleman's taking his shirt off and he's, tending to me, is I can remember my dad screaming. And again, my dad's a man's man, tough guy. He's my mentor, my coach, guy that I always looked up to. Man that had been through a lot, and he's screaming, oh my God, I just shot my son. I just shot my son. And he's just in this state of shock. Like, he can't believe this has happened. Well, he eventually comes over to us and he does the same thing, takes his shirt off. But when I'm looking at him, he can't say much, if anything. And so we're sitting there and we're out there together. And at this point, I'm looking at them and I'm realizing we're going to be out there for at least another 30 minutes before the guy gets back with the truck. And so I say, hey, look, we're all men here. I want y'all to shoot me straight and be honest with me. Am I going to make it through this? And the one guy that's with us, like, oh yeah, man, you're gonna be great. You're gonna be fine. Let's just focus on being here in the moment. And my dad, I look at my dad and he can't even look at me. I mean, he's just sitting there, his head's hanging. He can't make eye contact. And so I'm kind of getting two different messages here. One person, I don't know if he's being overly optimistic or if it's my dad that's kind of the more realistic one in this situation. And so I'm trying to figure things out at this time. But the one thing that the other gentleman said to us was, say, do you mind if I say a prayer with y'all? And at that time, I'm sitting there, and I'm gonna be honest with you, my prayer life, my faith life, I would say that I believe there was a God, but I wasn't actively involved in a relationship with God. I can certainly tell you that. And so when he asked if he could pray, I said, yeah, by all means, you can say a prayer. But I'm sitting there thinking in the back of my head, being the smart aleck that I am, if God really was active in this situation, wouldn't he have already protected me from this? Wouldn't he have already come down and protected this from happening? And then I'm sitting there thinking, and if we do say a prayer right now, is he going to build a golden staircase from heaven and come down on that golden staircase and come heal me of my wounds? And so these are thoughts that are going through my head at the time. But then again, about 30 minutes later, the guy finally gets out there with the truck, and it's a single cab Ford truck. So they load me up. He's in the driver's seat. They put me in the middle seat, and then my dad comes in next to me. Not enough room in the truck for the other gentleman. The other gentleman says, you know what, I'm gonna walk back. Y'all go get him to the hospital ASAP. And so at this point, my adrenaline is starting to come down. We got to go across this field. And at this point, I'm starting to feel everything. And it's not just, I feel this burning sensation in my chest. It's in my face. I can taste the blood. I see how much I've bled out through both my shirt and the other two shirts that were stuffed down into mine. And then I start to smell, and I apologize for making this graphic, but I can remember the smell. It was like this awful smell, and I realized that awful smell was my skin. It was like burning skin. And if you've ever burnt your skin, or burnt hair, you know what it smells like. It was that times 1,000. And so we're driving over this rocky terrain, and I can remember I had one pellet that was kind of lodged in my lip, and my lip started actually squirting blood. I was like, okay, this is not looking too good. And then I look in the mirror. Catch a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror, and I can see my left eye is completely shut. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I don't even know if I've got an eyeball in there, and if I do, it's got to be damaged pretty badly. So they get me to the hospital, little small hospital there in Lucedale, Mississippi. Load me up on a gurney and immediately start cutting all my clothes off. And first thing they do is hook me up to an IV for fluids, and then they hook me up to another IV, an IV for the pain. And at that time, I'd probably taken pain medication before for something else. But in this instance, I was looking for that relief. And going back to what you shared earlier, it wasn't just the physical pain that I was trying to get the relief from. It was that mental anguish, that mental and spiritual anguish, if you want to call it that, because it was just like, I have all these crazy thoughts going my throat. Am I going to make it? Am I going to have an eye once this is all said and done? Am I going to live through this? Am I going to be able to play sports again? Am I going to, all these things are going through my head. And so they give you that clicker. It's a morphine drip. They say, look, as soon as your pain hits a certain threshold, hit that clicker. Well, I'm hitting it, And I can remember very distinctly when I got that medication and it's hooked up to my arm, and I could feel the warmth, literally feel it tracking through my arm, across my chest, all the way down my legs, down to my toes. And going back to what you shared, it was a warm hug. It was like a warm hug, because my entire body was being hugged. And not only was it the physical pain that went away, but that mental, spiritual anguish that I was feeling, that just dissipated. And it was like, okay, I can deal with this now. Like, I'm okay. Like, I don't know what's going to play out with this, but it was like, okay, whatever comes of it, I'll be okay. And I would say that was my first experience with like that relief that came from pain medication. And it's funny. I'm not going to say like that instant, like, boom, I'm an addict. You give me a medication, I'm an instant addict in that moment. But I do know that it registers something in my brain. It did something. There was something that clicked in my brain. Like, I like the way this feels. And I may want to feel this more so down the road. And so that, so I was there in the hospital there in Lucedale, Mississippi for a couple of days. And then they transported me to St. Tammany Parish Hospital in Covington, Louisiana. And I was there for a couple of weeks in ICU. And then during that time that I'm there in ICU, I have a bunch of people from the local community, a lot of people that I know from home. They're coming to visit me in the hospital. But honestly, I don't remember anything, because I'm loaded up on pain pills, I'm loaded up on muscle relaxers, all kinds of things the entire time, because not because I'm an addict, but because I'm legitimately struggling with pain.
Yeah, you need the pain medicine at that point.
Exactly. So I was there, and then once I finish up my stint there's not really much they can do, and really, because all the pellets are into the muscle at this point, and so they can't go in and remove each individual pellet, because they'll just do more damage. It's amazing how quickly the body starts to heal itself. And so to go in and try to remove the pellets would have done more damage than good. So they said, we can just leave the pellets in there. Any of the ones that are in the surface layer, they'll work their way out, but you're pretty much just going to have to learn to live with pellets in your body. And then the one that was a major concern at the time was my eye. And it turns out that it just grazed my retina. And so all I was going to need in this situation was a little laser surgery, kind of a little touch-up laser surgery to prevent retinal detachment. I had a couple that got into my lungs, but going back to, I made the joke earlier, if God was really out there on that field that day, he would have came down and protected me. But looking back at it, and what the doctor said is that, the fact that I had the gun across my chest, it protected my heart. I mean, I got the pellets in my hands, said it protected a lot of my major organs the way that I was set up. With the exception of just a few puncture in my lungs. And so I looked up at God, in that moment, it's like, God's got a sense of humor. Like, this kind of thing happens. Here I am sitting there saying, if God would have really actively working in this world, he would have came down and put a shield. Well, it turns out that he did put a shield in front of me that protected me from this thing from being much worse. But yeah, so once I finished up my stint at the hospital, they sent me home, sent me home with a bunch of pain medications, sent me home with a bunch of prescriptions for, breakthrough pain. Here's some oxycodone for this. Here's hydrocodone for this one. Here's a muscle relaxer for this. And so I take my kit and caboodle of pain medication, and I go back home and I start taking it like it's prescribed to be taken. And then I have to, at this point, it's now time for me to go back to college, go back to school once I've had a chance to recover a little bit. So I take all my pain medication with me up to school. And really at this time, my focus is to get back on track with school, because obviously I missed a lot of school at this time. And then also get back on track with sports. That was something that was a huge component of my life, and I needed to get back into training. So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to do this. And so I'll get back there and start taking the pain medication as prescribed. And then I start to realize it's not working as effectively as it was beforehand. Obviously, there's a little bit of a tolerance that builds up from taking it. And then I start to realize, well, I'm a bigger guy. And at the time, I'm 225 pounds, playing fullback. I'm thinking, hey, I could probably afford to take another pain pill. Instead of taking, one every 4 to 6 hours, I'll take 2 every 4 to 6 hours. And then it became, hey, maybe I'll take 3 every 4 to 6 hours. And then I started shortening the window for how much time it was between pain medications. And, from there, it just continued to, I just kept on up in the ante. And then at that time, I probably should have recognized that this was leading to what may be a bigger problem, but I never really had that self-awareness to even consider it, because I was always deluding myself and telling myself a different story about what was playing out and why I was taking the pain medication.
I was going to ask you, were you chasing pain relief, or were you chasing the the internal pain relief, the mental pain relief?
Yeah, it was it initially started for the physical pain relief, but if I'm going to be 100% honest, I could probably have dealt with the physical pain relief.
Yeah.
I would have started taking some 800 milligram ibuprofen or
Yeah.
some Aleve. What I found is, and again, going back to like deluding myself, is that I was probably, I know that I was taking it for other reasons, because it made me feel okay, made me feel better, gave me a sense of comfort, gave me all of those things. And again, whenever you have it prescribed to you, it's easy for me to sit there and say, well, a doctor has prescribed this, so he wouldn't do that and steer me in the wrong direction, right? I mean, he wouldn't prescribe this medication. So it's very easy, going back to how cunning, baffling, and powerful this disease is, and just addiction is in general. It can convince you that you're doing it for one reason, when the reality behind it is you're doing it for something completely different. And that's what my experience was at that time.
So the lies were literally whispering. It was almost like it was a lie whispering into your ear, saying it's okay. It was justifying it. And I guess like any addiction, your body builds up the tolerance, so you need more and more of the drug.
Absolutely. But from that point, that wasn't my, that was just the tip of the iceberg. From there, I'd actually kind of separated myself from taking the pain medication, because first off, it ran out. And so I didn't have it readily available at my fingertips at that time. So I kind of stepped away from taking pain medication and went about my life. And then I did have, different injuries through my football playing career where I get prescribed pain medication, whether it's for concussions or a sprained ankle or broken ribs or another broken bone or whatever it may be. And so I'd have it at my disposal. And I knew every time that I got it, I enjoyed the way that it made me feel. And I knew that I was taking it. And again, I always had this mindset, like, I'm an athlete, I'm taking it to, so I can recover and heal, so I can get back into sports. But I was always pushing the envelope. I always consider myself to be a tough guy, man's man. I'm going to go out there, and I always want to prove to the coach. Actually, Mike DeBose was my head coach for my junior and senior year, and he was a tough guy, from University of Alabama. And I always prided myself on when he would tell me, if he told me that I was tough, that meant that I was tough. And so I always prided myself on being the tough guy. And he told me a few times that you keep being that tough guy that you are. We need you on offense. And I always took pride in that. So no matter what my injury was, broken ribs, whatever it may be, concussion, I'm gonna be out on that field that next play. That's just who I'm gonna be. And unfortunately, I probably did a lot more damage than good by playing through different injuries and doing things like that. But I always felt like, hey, take some pain medication and get through it, and just my body will heal itself. That's how it'll work. But again, it's kind of like these things are building up, and you're just kind of brushing them under the rug, not acknowledging them. And those things continue to pile up, and eventually you're going to have to face up to them at some point, whether it's injuries, physical injuries, or mental health things, or whatever it may be. You can keep pushing them to the side or pushing them down, whatever it may be. Feelings, they're going to come rear their ugly head at some point. Yeah. And that's exactly what happened in my experience, for sure.
In hindsight, I mean, like I said, hindsight's whatever it is. But if you're looking backwards, how would you have handled it differently?
Yeah. Well, I think that education is a huge part of this, and just letting young men, I mean, just people in general, know the dangers of it. But if I look back on it, I mean, it's going to be, part of me says I had to go through what I had to go through to get to where I am today. So I can't look back and say, like, maybe if I would have steered in a different direction, my life would have turned out differently. Yeah. Because it's part of my story today, and it's part of my journey. But if I'm looking back and I'm thinking about what is my take home message as I share this with young men, and what is the message that I want to convey to them, it's just that whenever you do step into the arena with a substance, like whether it's an opiate or let's just say alcohol, whatever it is, you may be playing Russian roulette with it, and you just don't know if you have that genetic predisposition to it. But if you do have that, that awareness of that, because I didn't even really think through that. I didn't even have that acknowledgement that I knew that my biological grandfather struggled with addiction and my uncle did, but I never thought like that would affect me directly, and that disposition was there. So again, I think it's the education component. I wish I would have known at that time the possibilities, but I don't know if that would have prevented me from doing it, because it was one of those instances where, they put me on the gurney and they hooked me up to pain medication, and I needed it in that moment. So, and but all the years of playing through injuries and doing things like that and being prescribed pain medication when I probably didn't need it, or I could have managed with other, over the counter pain relievers. I wish I probably would have gone a different direction versus taking those more hardcore opiates like we're talking about.
Well, I mean, and I'll tell you this, that last March when I had surgery, and back surgery is incredibly painful, and I needed the pain medication and I needed the opioids, but I also knew your story,
Mhm.
and I knew that it was in my family, and I knew that 30% of people who had the kind of surgery that I had ended up getting addicted to pain pills. I know that I ended up biting the bullet because I thought about what you've been through. And I mean, your story and the education that you've been able to give to people like me helped. And and I mean, yeah, it wasn't fun, but like you said, I could get by, and I couldn't take, only thing I could take was Tylenol. That was the only thing I could take. But I mean, I would like say, okay, I'll just take one pain pill a day and do it at night so I can try to get some sleep, and then I'll bite the bullet, and do it. But I didn't do it too quick because, but the point is that because of that education, I was able to make a better choice. And I wanted to thank you for that. I want to have a chance to be able to thank you personally for that. And I think at this point in the story, we need to probably talk about how you started really going downhill, because I think that your rise is so amazing because of where you ended up.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing the sentiments. And that's the exact reason why I share my stories, for that
Yeah.
exact reason. But yeah, I mean, going back to, how I spiraled out of control. So I stepped into, when I finished up college, I stepped into a role as a chemical sales person. And I thought that I was going to step into this role. Speaking of genetics, I thought I'd have the genetics predisposition to be a great salesman, because my father was great at sales. My biological grandfather on my mother's side was great at it. And so I stepped into an industrial chemical sales role, and I had no clue what I was doing. And I immediately felt these feelings of inferiority, anxiety, just feeling like less than, just feeling like I have no idea what the heck that I'm doing. All those feelings that I experienced as a kid, I mean, they came up like tenfold. And I'm sitting there thinking like, I am not good at this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I can remember when I went on my first sales call. I went to visit a guy in Macomb, Mississippi. Guy came out, had a big old belt buckle on, cowboy hat, handlebar mustache, cowboy boots. And I sat down across the table from him, and I tried to sell him on all the chemicals that we had. I showed him the full brochure, all the catalog, and he just closed it gently, slid it back across the table, and he was very polite, but essentially looked at me and said, "Boy, you really got yourself in over your head. You have no idea what you're doing." And I can remember going back to my car and sitting in my car after that first sales call and thinking, I am terrible at this. I have no idea what I'm doing. I feel no confidence whatsoever. I feel like a loser. That's what I felt like. I felt like a loser. And it was like this little crazy thought came in, like, hey, you remember when you took pain meds and how you felt? Because when I took pain meds, and some people may experience it differently, but I guess this is part of those ones that struggle with addiction, is I feel like it makes me feel a little bit of an upper feel. I feel good. I feel comfortable. I feel like I may not be able to dance, but I feel like I can dance. I mean, I think I can talk to ladies, but I feel like I can when I put a pain pill in my system. So it always gave me that sense of like confidence, not just relief, but confidence. Like I've got it, in a sense of I'm okay with who I am. And so I had a few pain pills left over, and it was a great, one of my favorite sayings: when an insane thought hits an insane brain, it comes out as a brilliant idea. And I had this brilliant idea that I could take a pain pill before I went on my next sales call and get that confidence that I was looking for. And that's what I did. And I took it. And now, whether I did a better job selling or not, I can't tell you that, but I did make a sale. I sold something. It wasn't a lot. I sold like a box of aerosol spray, but I had this neuroassociation, this thing, this thing that hit my brain that said, okay, you take a pain pill, you go on a sales call, you make a sale, you make some money. And so I started to kind of, taking pain pills and started doing this, and I started to see some success doing it. And started to kind of do the calculation. Okay, if I take a pain pill, maybe I can do this for a little bit until I get a little more comfortable in this role, get my feet up underneath me, and then eventually I'll stop doing that. I'll get away from taking the pain medication. I'll stop doing it, but I just need to get some kind of confidence. I need to get some wins under my belt, and that's what I did. And then just like addiction happens, just like the disease of more always produces never enough. I could never get enough of it. Yeah, and I kept on pushing the envelope, taking more and more pain pills. Eventually I ran out of my supply of pain pills. And then I started reaching out to friends that I knew from football that had surgeries, friends that I knew that didn't like the pain pills that they had, and they'd just give me their pain pills. And then eventually ran out of those options and started trying to figure out other ways to get pain pills. And I always tried to steer clear of doing the doctor shopping thing, but eventually I did go to a doctor's office and tell them I had some pain associated with, some shoulder injuries that I had from playing football. And, they'd write you a prescription right there on the spot. And so I'd done that type of thing. And then eventually I'd reached out to a friend that I knew had some pain pills. He said, man, I don't have any, but I know a guy that does. Gave me his phone number, and I started to text this guy, and met the guy in a parking lot somewhere, gave him money. He gave me pain pills, and sure enough, it's a drug transaction. So here I've got myself a drug dealer now who I start to now interact with on a regular basis, and start texting him and reaching out to him for pain pills.
Wow.
And it's amazing how quickly it can happen. And it's amazing how all these things just kind of bypass your brain as you're going through it. I'm sitting there convincing myself I need this medication to make sales. And then also I'm justifying it, saying, well, you have some lagging injuries, some injuries that happened from your football playing days. So it's okay for you to take pain pills. And then also I wanted to pride myself on the fact that I wasn't drinking. I had a lot of friends that drank heavily and still did that. I was like, well, I'm taking pain pills. At least I'm not drinking and getting drunk. So I was always justifying my reasons for why I needed to take them. And then I started, I took them then I started taking them, I was dating a girl at the time. We'd go to dinner with her family. It would be an event that I really didn't feel like going to. You kind of have to painfully show up. And I'd be like, you know what, I'll take a pain pill. At least I can make it through it by taking a pain pill. And it was always the next thing, like the next thing I needed it for. Then it started to be hang out with my own family. I'll take a pain pill. And then, then I realized that I'm married, and I've taken pain medication for my marriage, and taking pain pills for, going on the honeymoon. There's a lot of things that I'm just starting to ramp it up and just taking it. And then eventually, as you're starting to take more of it, I'm spending a lot more money as well. And it's just starting to accumulate, and I'm taking out huge chunks of money out of our bank account. And at the time, my wife and I we're no longer married, but my wife at the time, we were just freshly married. We weren't married for just about a couple of months at this time. And my addiction is really spiraling out of control. And we have a joint bank account. And she starts to see big chunks of money leaving the account. And she starts to call me out for it and saying, like, where's this money going to? And I start lying and telling her that I have to, make a cash payment for this bill because we missed it and they wouldn't accept a credit card payment. I got to pay for this type of thing, insurance payments, whatever it may be. And it turns out I'm not paying for any of those things. So not only am I taking huge chunks of money out, I'm also not paying the things that, whether it's tax related, being related to the car, insurance payments. And so we're starting to get notices in the mailbox saying like, hey, you're this far back on your payments. And so at the time I'm thinking I can intercept the mail so that she can't get it. But eventually a few of those things start to fall between the cracks, and she starts to see the mail that's coming through, and she starts to really kind of do the math and realize this money's being used elsewhere, and he's lying through his teeth. And so at that time, she called me out and said, you're a liar. And I think that you're a drug addict. She's like, look at your appearance. You used to take care of yourself. You used to, go to the gym and work out and exercise. You don't even do that anymore. And I realized as I look in the mirror, I just see black circles under my eyes, and I've lost, 30 pounds at the time. And I look terrible. And again, you're just constantly denying these facts to yourself. But then eventually, again, you keep sweeping the things under the rug. They're going to pile up high enough. And eventually you got to deal with them and face them. And I got to that place where it's like, okay, I don't even know how to deal with this anymore. Because at this point, that's when it like hit me. Like, I am an addict. I am struggling with addiction. I am spending all of my family's money on drugs, and I'm not getting any benefit from it anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. That was the part that was scary, is that I didn't want to do it anymore, Marshall, but I didn't know how to quit. Like, I was just sitting there like, it's no longer a conscious thought to go to to go call my drug dealer or to go grab pain pills off the counter. It's just something I just did. And then I'm sitting there thinking like, today, I'm not going to do it today. Not doing it today. And no matter what, some days I could white knuckle it and make it through. Some days I get to noon and be like, I got to reach out to my dealer, because, you get all the physical withdrawals, the sweats, just feeling terrible. can't sleep. It's like you're crawling out of your skin. And then the mental guilt, just that feeling, just knowing that you're just, again, feeling like a loser. And that was the part that always drove me back to it.
Would that feeling that you felt like a loser, was that the trigger that would trigger you to go back to it?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yes, it absolutely
Okay.
was. It was that, and then that feeling of guilt, just like that guilt of just knowing that, like, internally, you're not doing right. And I knew it at the core of who I was. And eventually my ex-wife and I had at that time had a big blow up fight, and I got scared. So what I did is I loaded up my company car. At the time I was doing pharmaceutical sales. I landed a pharmaceutical sales job in the midst of all this chaos. I loaded up my company car and drove down to Louisiana to go stay with my parents. Didn't have a game plan. And when I got down there, I'd reached out to a friend, and we'd kind of been interacting on Facebook. And he's a guy that I know and had struggled with alcoholism. Yeah. And 6 months prior, he had lost everything because of alcoholism. He had a good job, wife, nice home. He lost it all. And so we connected, and I don't even know why I reached out. I don't even know how we started communicating. And he offered to come over to my parents' house. He knew that I was going through a tough time. And so he showed up to my parents' house, and here I am thinking, like, this person's going to show up down and out. He just lost everything 6 months ago. And he shows up and he's in a genuinely good mood, like authentic good mood, not chemical induced good mood. Like, you could tell that he was genuinely happy. And he shows up and we start talking, and I'm like, part of me wants to say, man, why are you in such a good mood? You just lost everything. Life's kind of a little crummy for you right now. Why are you in such a good mood? And he says, look, yes, I struggle with alcoholism, and I struggle with, I burned my life to the ground essentially because of alcohol, but I made a decision to go get help for it. And so now I'm in recovery. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this guy's in recovery. Like, I was like, and part of me is like, what a loser. I can't believe that he decided to get in recovery. Like, why would you go to recovery? You're talking about going to those meetings where people sit around and drink styrofoam cups of coffee and smoke cigarettes and, woe is me, and pat each other on the back and say it's all going to be okay. Like, that wasn't my style. To me, that just seemed like, okay, you're just trying to tell everybody it's going to be okay, but in the grand scheme of things, your life is terrible. And but what it did is he ended up eventually left my parents' house. But what it did is it planted a seed. And later that evening, as I was about to go to bed and sleep at my parents' house, I just felt this voice in my head say, you need to get help. You need to get help for this, and you need to admit it. And I sat my parents down. I went out there and I said, hey, look, I got to talk to you about something. And I sat them down and I said, look, I'm struggling with an addiction to opiate painkillers. And my mom started crying. Oh my God, I can't believe my baby's struggling with this. And my dad looked at me and point blank said, I can't believe you turned out to be that type of person.
Oh no.
And man, talk about hurt.
Yeah.
But it was a really strange thing, because it really hurt to hear it. But then there was another part of me that was like a moment of clarity, where it was like, he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand, because he himself has never been through this. And all he's seen his entire life is seen his father leave his family. He's seen his brother struggle with addiction, going in and out of jail and in and out of treatment centers. And so he's always looked at it as a weakness. And he's sitting there thinking, he's not saying it in a way to be callous or mean. He's sitting there and it's almost like he's saying it to himself. I can't believe that my son, who I raised to be anything but this, is struggling with this. And he's probably sitting there in his mind thinking, how the heck did this happen? Yeah. I raised you to be anything but this. And again, that's the power of the disease of addiction. And so we came up with the game plan, and we talked about like what we're going to do. And he said, how do you want to approach this? And I said, I think I need to get help for it. And initially we were going to do an outpatient treatment center, but then again, that voice came back in later that evening and said, you need to get your butt into an inpatient treatment center. And I know we're running out of time, but that night I went to bed and I felt the peace about, like, okay, this is what I need to do. This is the path I need to pursue, is go inpatient. And I woke up the next morning, and at this time I was, I still was gainfully employed, managing my life. But my boss had sent a group text to everybody that he managed at the time, and there was about 10 of us on the group text. And he had said that his son, who was a couple years younger than me, that I knew from growing up, had passed away in his sleep. And he didn't go into any specifics about what had happened, but he said that, but I knew his son. and I knew the kind of people that he was hanging out with, and I knew the types of things that he was doing, and I knew that it was a direct result of a drug overdose. And in that moment, it was I got chills. I mean, I got chills because it was like God was speaking to me, saying that voice you heard yesterday that said that you need to get to a treatment center. That was me speaking to you. And I'm not saying that that young man had to die to save my life, but I can tell you this, that it absolutely did, and it reiterated to me that I needed to get help for it. And that's what I did. I went to a treatment center and got introduced to recovery principles and what is recovery all about. And you talked about my rise from addiction. It really started there, but it didn't start there at the treatment center. Where it started for me was an absolute surrender, a surrender of every bit of who I was, everything that I thought that I was, everything that I thought I stood for. I had to surrender all of that. And I remember being in treatment, and I've been there for 20, I think I've been in there for 20 days at this point. And they're talking about, keep talking about prayer life and, submitting your life to God and all these things. And I'm having a hard time with it. I'm just like not getting it. And so finally I go out in this field, and it's a beautiful space. It's out in, it's in a little suburb of Baton Rouge where the treatment center was. And I go out into this field, and I'm just, all right, God, the gloves are off. Me and you are going to talk about this. We're going to have a conversation about how this happened. And I'm sitting there saying, why did this have to happen to me? Why did I have to go through all these experiences? Why did I have to feel so insecure growing up? Why did I have to go through that traumatic experience of being shot? Why did I go through all of this stuff and to end up here in a treatment center with nothing? Like I'm about to lose my wife, my car, my house, everything, my job. How did I end up here? And I said a lot of expletives at the time. I just kind of just like God have it. And I'm not gonna say God spoke to me in that moment, because I just felt like, at this moment, I felt a sense of relief. Like finally, all right, God, I finally got it off my chest. But I do remember, it may have been a couple of days later, I was sitting we're sitting there watching a video, and just like for anybody that's been in a classroom setting and you watch the video, the teacher rolls the TV in there, certain kids start to fall asleep. Nobody's really paying attention to the video. They're playing some video about the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was starting to kind of zone out. But in that moment, I just felt this just power come into me. And I talked about that feeling of that warmth going up my arm when I got that first shot of morphine. It was like that times a million. It was just this peace that came, and it was from head to toe. Tears are just streaming down my face. And usually when I tell this, I usually get emotional just thinking about it, but I had goosebumps, and it just felt this peace. And it was like God was telling me, I'm with you. I've got you. I've got you. And it went on for about an hour and a half. I mean, through the entire video. And I'm just, the entire time, just tears are streaming down my face. And I've just got this feeling, this lightness within me. And I'm looking around at all these people, and I'm having this deep spiritual experience while all these other people are passing out, not watching the video. And I'm thinking, like, this God thinks for real. Like, God is for real. And it's like he's essentially been waiting for me to turn this all over to him and just say, here, you take this burden that I've been carrying with me for so doggone long. You take it. It's like he's been waiting for me to do that. And it was like, once I gave it to him, he said, this is what you've been missing out on. This is that peace that you've been missing out on. And this is what you've been seeking through substances, pills. You've been seeking this peace and serenity and love and all of these things and feeling okay with who you are. It's there for you. It's just a matter of, are you willing to let go of what you got right now, willing to let go of the life that you got and surrender it to me? And that's exactly from that moment on, I said, all right, you're the God that I can do business with. And I can approach life with this. I can definitely go into life with this. And so that's how I've approached my life ever since.
I was walking out of seeing my therapist when my parents were ill and dying, and I was talking to his assistant, and as I was writing the check, and we were talking about addiction and talking about some of the challenges on that and everything, and she just looked at me and she said, all addiction is somebody trying to fill a God-shaped hole in their heart.
Amen.
And I was thinking about what you were saying on that, and about how you were able to find that peace and to get that peace, which is such a blessing. And I think I don't think many people know this, but I mean, obviously opioids are probably one of the hardest addictions to beat. And for you to be able to have that moment, and for you to get that purpose and to be able to let it go, that's really stark. Cause I've known a couple of people who've relapsed several times, and on that, but from that point on, you were good, weren't you?
I was. It
Yeah.
was because I had that deep spiritual experience, I think. And I think that, we talk about in recovery, people have more of an educational variety of
Yeah.
recovery where they learn more about it. But for me, I had that direct experience with God, and it was like, okay, God, I know you're for real. And I know that the life that I was living beforehand is not what you intended for me.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean, look, and I always share this, like whenever I got into recovery and I've started, sobered up and did all the things that I've done up to this point, it doesn't make it all sunshine and rainbows and easy. I think people think that all of a sudden you get into recovery and it's all just,
Right.
smooth sailing from there. And it's not, because then now you got to deal with
You got to do the work.
Yeah, you got to do the work, and you got to deal with
Yeah.
the wreckage and all the stuff that you created. But as long as I'm staying present, I'm with God, and He's actively working in my life, and I'm doing the work like you shared. Because that's the part, is it's not an easy journey. It's simple, but it's not easy. As long as I'm taking the steps that I need to take, everything else takes care of itself, and I leave the outcome in His hands. If I do the work that I need to do.
What were the first steps you took when you came out of recovery?
First steps that I took. So initially, before I went into recovery, the first thing that I'd done is I'd reached out to my boss after he had told me about his son passing away.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going to do the first thing as a man that I've done in a long time. I'm going to be honest with him and tell him where I'm going, and tell him that I'm going to go into treatment. And so I went and actually to his house. He's had a bunch of people over at his house that were mourning the loss of his son. And I had to go walk up to the front door and walk into this man's home and tell him about my struggles with addiction. But I did tell him during that call, he gave me a big hug. He said, man, I'm so happy that you're doing this. He was an ex-football player, played at the University of Alabama, huge man. And he just, he said, I'm thank you. He thanked me for it, first off.
Yeah.
And he said, and he said, thank you for just being an honest person. He said, and I know that you'll do what you need to do to recover from this. But I made a promise to him. I said, hey, when I get out of here, I promise you that I'm going to come back and I'm going to be the best employee that I possibly can be. So when I first got out of treatment, first thing that I did is I reached back out to him, and because they let me stay on with the company during that 30-day stint. And I said, what do you need me to do? I'm going to suit up and show up and do what I need to do. And then I started to get actively involved in the recovery community. I started to reach out and go to recovery meetings and doing those things. It was something when I first got into treatment, I was like, I probably won't do this. But after having that experience with God, I was like, this is something that I need to do. And it's something it's still very active in my life today. It's something that's a huge part of my recovery, is continuing to do those things and working through the steps. The steps is my Bible, if you will. I mean, I still read the Bible, but that's my place that I go to. That's my directions that I follow. And it's not something you just go to the 12 steps one time. It's an ongoing process. It's like you're removing layers of an onion as you continue to do it. And something, in year 7 of recovery may be revealed to you that you didn't know beforehand, but it's just by continuing to do the work and the things that you need to do.
And that's the thing. And I think people need to understand, it has not been all sunshine and rainbows for you since then. You have had challenges, you have been knocked down, but it's a lot easier to get back up when you're not on drugs. I would say that would be one case. But I mean, I've seen you had some challenges that you have navigated really well, because the fact that you've got this piece that helps propel you forward.
Absolutely. I would agree 100% with that.
So where are you now?
I'm in Covington, Louisiana.
No, where are you in your life too?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, no, I mean, I'm not trying to have people come track you down. So today in my life, so I have remarried. So I went through after my struggles with addiction, I went through a pretty ugly divorce, but I'm remarried. I have a 5-year-old daughter now. Who's adorable.
Yeah. Thank you. She is a combination of my wife and I to a T. She's strong and gritty. She's also can be quiet unless you get to know her. Once you get to know her, she doesn't stop talking. But she is the greatest blessing that I've received, as well as my wife. And I'm in Covington. I'm actually I a huge part of my life once I got into recovery was coaching. Coaching was a big part of it, physical fitness, but had some things that kind of went to the wayward side. And so I've actually stepped into a project management role for an IT company.
Yeah.
So I'm based down here in Covington, Louisiana. And tell you what, man, my life is beyond blessed right now. Like they always say in recovery, if you wrote out, they tell you, if you wrote out a list of all the things that you wanted to get in your recovery journey, you would sell yourself way short. And that is the absolute truth. Everything that I've gotten, and I can spell it. I can give you a full list of all the material accomplishments and those things, but that pales in comparison to what I've gotten from, again, filling that God-shaped hole with God and having him actively work in my life, and that peace and serenity, joy and contentment that comes from that to me is the greatest gift that I received. And it directly affects every aspect of my life as having that. And that's the reason why I have the beautiful family that I have, and the beautiful wife that I have, and the beautiful life that I do have.
Well, and I would imagine that your daughter's very fortunate because she has two wonderful parents that get it too, that she won't be facing these demons that you're facing too. I'd imagine that gives her an extra layer of protection, but you'll be there no matter what happens, right?
Absolutely. We're prepared for anything at this point. If she were to go down that path, we'd be prepared for it. So.
Well, I will say this: I've had a lot of coaches in my life. You're definitely one of the, if not most, motivational ones that I've come across. You managed to get that across at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm grateful to know you, and I'm grateful that we've had this opportunity to talk. Is there anything else you would like, any advice you'd like to give anybody who's sitting here watching us right now, who's struggling and they don't know where to turn or they don't know where to go? What advice would you give them right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Because this was my biggest struggle, and I think that for so many years I just avoided asking for help because I didn't think that's. Again, I was taught as a man you don't ask for help, but
right,
absolutely reach out for help. There are plenty of places that you can go to reach out to help. I mean, there's online sources that you can go to for it. You can go to it. I mean, look up your local Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. But if you need treatment and if you're going through withdrawal symptoms, go to a local hospital. They can bring you through that detox process. But also there's a lot of other avenues out there for people that if they can't afford it for whatever reason, that they will provide you the means and the support to do that if you do look for online sources. And if anybody's really struggling, obviously I'd even be willing to give you my name and contact information because I'll help out in any way that I can as well.
It's Neil Woodall. Like I said, if you get a chance, look up his posts on Facebook. Because like I said, you usually help me get my mind right, usually every other day when I see your posts. So I wanted to say thank you for that too.
Absolutely. The feeling's
Neil,
more than mutual, right, Marshall?
Neil, it's a blessing, man. You're a blessing, and thank you for spending this time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of Mississippi Stories. Make sure to subscribe to the Mississippi Today YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified every time a new video uploads.